She had no reason to trust a human. And yet, on a frozen morning in Alaska, a wild wolf stepped from the forest with something cradled in her jaws. A dying pup, her only child, and she laid it gently at the feet of a stranger. Not with teeth, not with growls, but with eyes full of hope. That's how it began. A silent plea, a fragile heartbeat, and a choice that would change all 3 lives forever. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The sky above Mendenhall Valley was a dull, pewter gray, stretching over the snowy expanse like a heavy woolen sheet. Winter here was not merely a season, it was a living presence, the kind that pressed into your bones and whispered through every crack in the cabin walls. Rhea Calloway stood at her window that morning, cupping a mug of cinnamon coffee, watching frost etch delicate veins across the glass like frozen lace. At 29, Rhea had learned the language of solitude. Once an art school prodigy in Portland, she had traded gallery openings and crowded cafes for towering pines and the howl of distant wind. Now she was a wildlife conservation volunteer and self-taught survivalist, living alone in a modest cedar cabin tucked just a few miles from Juneau's outer edge. Her auburn hair, usually pulled into a messy bun, caught stray rays of light as she turned from the window and reached for her parka. Rhea had always been sensitive, not fragile, just open in a way that made her feel too much. And when her older brother Evan, a U.S. forest ranger, died in a landslide rescue mission the year before, the world had become unbearably loud. She came here to heal in the hush of trees. The morning was colder than usual. Even the pine needles looked brittle under the weight of snow. Rhea zipped up her jacket thick with down and slid on fur-lined boots. She was planning to check the wildlife camera traps she had set along the western ridge to monitor the dwindling caribou herd. The data would be sent to the Juneau Conservation Office, her way of contributing, of staying useful. As she stepped outside, the cold greeted her with a slap. Her breath crystallized into soft clouds that vanished almost as quickly as they formed. She pulled her scarf higher over her nose, adjusted her gloves, and froze. There, no more than 10 feet from her porch, stood a wolf. Not just any wolf, this one was enormous. Her fur a pale silver gray tinged with white, like snow fallen on ash. Her body was lean but muscular, the kind of wild strength that only came from surviving harsh winters. Her ears were alert, her tail was still, and in her mouth, dangling like a forgotten toy, was a limp bundle of fur. A pup. The wolf's amber eyes locked onto Rhea's. They weren't feral or angry. They were tired. Raw. Wide with a kind of emotion Rhea didn't expect pain. Yes, but also something eerily close to hope. Her heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at her to back into the cabin, lock the door, and call wildlife authorities. But she couldn't move. Her fingers curled around the doorframe, knuckles whitening. The world around her quieted, as if the trees themselves held their breath. The wolf stepped forward, once then lowered her head, setting the pup gently on the porch with a grace that defied every rule Rhea had learned about apex predators. Then the mother wolf backed up slowly, never breaking eye contact, and crouched in the snow like a statue carved by nature itself. Rhea glanced down. The pup was still breathing barely. Its small body heaved in shallow waves. Blood darkened the fur on its ribs, and snowflakes collected on its tiny ears. It was dying. The silence broke with the whisper of wind and the faint whimper of the pup. The mother wolf made a sound low in her throat, not a growl but a tremor, like grief made audible. It was then Rhea realized this wasn't a trick. This wasn't an animal stumbling towards civilization in confusion or hunger. This was a mother asking for help. Rhea had never moved so carefully in her life. She unwrapped the wool scarf from her neck, never taking her eyes off the wolf, and knelt slowly. The pup's fur was soft, matted with blood. It weighed almost nothing in her hands. "I'm going to take your baby inside," she whispered, not knowing why she spoke aloud. Maybe it was to calm the mother. Maybe it was to calm herself. The wolf didn't move. Step by step, Rhea backed into the house. Her boots crunched softly on the porch wood. The door creaked as she nudged it shut with her heel. Once inside, she bolted it, not out of fear, but to buy herself space to think. She placed the pup on a pile of old flannel blankets near the wood stove. The heat would help, but the wound looked bad, deep and jagged. Infection had already begun to take hold. She fetched her wildlife field kit, pulling out antibiotic cream saline solution and a tiny eyedropper. Her hands trembled. She called Jonah Quinn, a trusted friend and wildlife vet in Juneau. He was 32, a calm, gentle soul with an encyclopedic knowledge of Alaska's fauna and a voice like a warm fire. He didn't answer. She left a message, panic rising like a tide, so she did what she could. She cleaned the wound, talking to the pup in soft whispers. She warmed a mix of honey and filtered water, coaxing a few drops into its mouth. The pup stirred faintly, a twitch of an ear, a faint noise like a whimper caught in its throat. Outside, the mother wolf remained. Through the frosted window, Rhea could just make out her shape in the snow, motionless, unblinking, a silver sentinel watching over the cabin. Night fell fast in Alaska, turning the world into a vast shadow. Inside the cabin, the pup began to breathe more evenly. Rhea dozed lightly in the rocking chair, jerking awake every time the fire popped. Around midnight, she looked again out the window. The wolf was still there. Rhea sat down on the floor next to the tiny nest of blankets. She reached out a hesitant hand and rested it lightly against the pup's back, feeling its weak heartbeat flutter beneath her fingers. "I'll call you Ash," she whispered, "because you were born of fire and snow, and because you're still burning." The storm that night thickened, but inside the cabin, warmth and quiet held steady. As sleep claimed her at last, Rhea thought of the mother wolf of her silent plea, and of the fragile life she now cradled on the edge of death and miracle. The second night fell colder than the first. Snow drifted across the windows in soft, whispering sheets. The fire crackled quietly inside the cabin as Rhea Calloway leaned over the bundle of woolen blankets she had arranged beside the stove. Nestled inside was Ash, the tiny gray wolf pup who clung to life in fragile, halting breaths. His body was still feverish, the gash on his side swollen and red, and she knew infection had taken root. Rhea hadn't slept much. Every hour she stirred from her chair to check his pulse, his temperature, the rise and fall of his ribs. She had lit a second lamp in the room to keep the shadows at bay, afraid that one long blink might be the last time she'd see him breathing. Whisper the mother wolf was still outside just beyond the window pane. She hadn't moved more than a few paces in either direction, watching silently through the swirling snow like a carved idol of winter. Rhea dipped a cloth into warm, salted water and gently dabbed at the wound again. The antiseptic she had was limited, a half-empty tube of veterinary ointment from a rescue job last year when she'd helped a porcupine caught in a fence. It would have to do. She reached for her phone again. This time, Jonah Quinn answered. Jonah was in his early 30s, lean with soft gray eyes and a calm demeanor that seemed to slow down whatever chaos surrounded him. He spoke slowly, thinking as he talked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed both the wonder and brutality of the natural world. He had once stitched up a black bear cub with nothing more than field gauze and a belt. If anyone knew what to do, it was him. Rhea's words tumbled out in a whisper. Jonah the pup's still alive. But barely. The wound's deep and angry. There's pus at the edges. I've cleaned it twice, gave him honey water every few hours, but I don't know if it's enough. Jonah paused on the line and she imagined him standing in the hallway of his clinic, rubbing the back of his neck like he always did when worried. "Okay," he said. "Finally." "You're doing good, Rhea. Keep it warm, keep it hydrated. I can try to hike out tomorrow morning if the weather holds, but you need to hold the line until then. I'm not trained for this, Jonah. You've got heart. And instinct. Sometimes that's half the battle." She hung up and crouched beside Ash again. The pup twitched, a soft whimper escaping him. She reached for the eyedropper, filled it with the honey mixture, and touched it gently to his lips. His tongue flicked out weakly, lapping at the liquid. A sliver of hope pressed through her exhaustion. Later that evening, she stepped outside onto the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Whisper sat a short distance away beneath a pine, her fur powdered in snow ears, twitching every so often at the distant caw of circling ravens. When Rhea looked at her, the wolf did not flinch. Her amber eyes reflected the light from the cabin behind Rhea like glass catching fire. There was no sound between them, only understanding. Back inside, Rhea lit the oil lamp near her easel. She hadn't touched her sketchbook in days, not since before the wolf came. Now the pencil slid across the page, like her hand had been waiting. She drew Whisper from memory, her sharp gaze, the curve of her haunches, the wildness in her stillness. It was not a predator she was sketching, it was a mother. She added subtle details, the tangle of pine needles in her fur, the faint scar above her right eye, and snow melting around her paws. It was the first drawing in what would become something deeper than a series, an unfolding truth about gentleness hidden within the wild. Around midnight, the wind howled, and something rattled near the storage shed. Rhea grabbed a flashlight and stepped out to investigate. What she found instead was a fox, half-starved and thin, sniffing the air near her woodpile. Whisper snarled from the shadows. The fox fled, instantly vanishing like smoke. Rhea turned and saw Whisper standing much closer than before, just 5 feet from the porch, her breath rising in white plumes. She didn't snarl at Rhea. She just stood there. "You've been watching," Rhea said quietly. "I think you know. I'm trying." She opened the door slowly. "I'll keep trying." Inside, Ash stirred again. His breathing was less ragged now, though still shallow. Rhea adjusted the blankets, added a second log to the fire, and sat back down with her notebook. Beside her drawing of Whisper, she began jotting observations. His response to the honey water, his tremors, his intermittent whimpers. She had never kept a medical log before, but something told her it might matter. Now. The next morning, the sun returned in slivers of gold, bouncing weakly off the snow-covered landscape. Ash blinked one eye open. Just one. But Rhea nearly cried when she saw it. "You're still here," she whispered. "You're fighting." By late afternoon, his ears twitched at every noise. He still couldn't lift his head, but his eyes followed her when she moved. She hummed to him softly, old Appalachian songs her mother used to sing when storms knocked the power out. Songs about firelight and rivers and things that endured. She didn't know if the pup understood, but she swore he calmed when she did it. That night, Whisper did something she hadn't done before. She circled the cabin once, as if inspecting the structure, then curled up beneath Rhea's bedroom window. Rhea knew, because when she stepped outside at dawn, she found a hollow in the snow where the heat of Whisper's body had melted a perfect oval. It was the shape of trust, carved in ice. It had been 5 days since Ash was laid on the porch like a forgotten offering, and somehow, through fever and cold, he had survived. His ribs no longer trembled with every breath, and his eyes, now open, more often tracked movement with a slow, dawning curiosity. He still couldn't walk, not truly, but he could shift in the blankets with effort, and he responded to Rhea's voice when she entered the room. That morning, she found him licking at his paw in the pale firelight, A small, almost silly act, but it stirred a fierce hope inside her. Outside the cabin, the snow had deepened, settling like a breath held too long. The pines stood still as sculptures, and for the first time in days, the sky broke open in slivers of blue. Rhea stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in her mug, and saw it clearly. A small, gutted rabbit lay near the edge of the clearing, its body intact, but partially cleaned. Whisper had left it there just like the squirrel the day before. It wasn't aggression. It was ritual. A gift. Whisper sat beneath the same spruce, her tail curled around her paws, her coat glistening with melted frost. She met Rhea's gaze but didn't rise. Rhea said nothing, just nodded once, and stepped back inside. Later that afternoon, Rhea opened her sketchbook, flipping through pages of soft charcoal and quiet memory. She'd drawn Ash every day curled in his nest, twitching in sleep, blinking beneath the folds of blanket. She began adding dates and notes beside each sketch wound color appetite response to sound. The sketches blurred the line between art and field journal, and somehow that made them feel more sacred. She had just finished a new page, a profile of Whisper looking over her shoulder, when the sound of tires crunching through snow made her freeze. She glanced toward the window and saw a dark green truck inching up her long driveway. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game logo gleamed faintly on the door. She stepped outside, tightening her scarf. A tall man climbed from the driver's side, his boots sinking deep into the snow. His coat was state-issued, thick with faded patches. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with crow's feet set deep at the corners of his eyes, and a tired but honest face. "I'm looking for Rhea Calloway," he said. "That's me," she replied. "You must be with ADFG." He extended a gloved hand. "Mason Durling, wildlife officer. Mind if we talk for a moment?" Rhea nodded, leading him to the porch. Mason removed his hat, revealing salt and pepper hair dampened with sweat. He didn't sit, just leaned against the railing, glancing toward the tree line. "There's been some calls," he began, not unkindly. Couple reports of a large gray wolf spotted too close to town. One was near Glacier Valley Elementary. Got people nervous. Rhea's heart sank. "She's not a threat," she said. "She hasn't heard anything." "That may be," Mason replied, "but public safety comes first. Once fear gets into people's blood, it's hard to reason it out. Our office is recommending a relocation order for both the adult and the juvenile if the latter's in human custody." Rhea felt like the ground had tilted beneath her. "He's not ready. He's still healing. You relocate them now, and he might not survive." Mason nodded solemnly. "I understand truly. But this isn't just about you and them anymore. If something happens, anything, it's on the state. You've got maybe 5 days before we're ordered to act." He handed her a thin manila folder. Inside were relocation protocol papers, information on the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Sitka, and a waiver request should she decide to surrender Ash voluntarily. "I'm not trying to punish anyone," he added, "but I need to give you the truth, not a story." Rhea said nothing. She simply stared into the trees, where she knew Whisper waited. After Mason left, Rhea sat on the floor beside Ash. He blinked up at her, one paw resting lazily across his chest. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, "but I won't let them take you too early either." That night, Whisper came closer than she ever had. Rhea heard her outside the bedroom window, her steps quiet, measured. In the morning, a new gift awaited a smooth riverstone, its surface polished by time, placed exactly where Ash had been first laid. Rhea picked it up and turned it in her palm. It was cool, oddly comforting, like a shared message she couldn't quite decipher. By the 3rd day, Ash tried to stand. It lasted 2 seconds, then a collapse into the bedding, but his muscles had remembered something. Rhea encouraged him, coaxed him with bits of soft-boiled egg and broth. She placed a small pillow nearby to brace his flank as he leaned. He whimpered when she pulled away, a sound that made her laugh through the tears. That same day, Jonah hiked in through the trees. He carried a heavy canvas satchel slung over one shoulder and had snow clinging to his beard. Rhea let him in without words, and he crouched beside Ash with the quiet reverence of someone visiting a sacred place. Jonah examined the wound, nodding approvingly. Clean work. Better than some techs I've trained. He stayed for tea, and then offered to write a temporary wildlife care extension, giving Rhea 1 more week, just enough time maybe to let Ash finish healing before any relocation attempt. But you'll need to call it in to Sarah Cole, he warned. She's head of conservation now, and she'll want a report. Rhea jotted that down. I'll call her tomorrow. As night fell, she lit the fire and sat near the stove. Ash curled beside her in a blanket nest. Jonah slept in the guest room, and Whisper, Rhea knew without looking, was somewhere in the shadows, standing sentinel as always. Outside, the moon rose over the pines, casting silver threads across the snow. The morning after the final snowfall arrived, dressed in gold. Sunlight spilled across the ridgeline, melting the sharp edges of the snow into a soft sheen. It was the kind of day that made even the frozen world feel forgiving. Rhea Calloway stood at her porch, her breath ghosting the air as she cradled the small wooden crate in her arms. Inside, nestled against a thick nest of wool and fleece, Ash blinked up at her. He had grown. Not by much in size, but in energy. His legs were still unsteady, but he could walk, even run in bursts, though he often stumbled like a fawn. His eyes no longer carried the dull glaze of survival. They shimmered now, with something youthful, almost mischievous. He had even found his voice a soft, raspy yip that he used when Rhea entered the room or offered food. But today, there was no food. Today, there was only the forest and the inevitable. Rhea wore 3 layers beneath her jacket and tucked a folded piece of paper in her coat pocket, a sketch she'd drawn 2 nights before. It showed Ash and Whisper under the same moon, their shadows touching. She had titled it, "The Moment Between." She didn't plan to show it to anyone. She followed the ridge trail she used in autumn to reach a rocky alcove where the trees thinned and the ground dipped into a shallow cradle of stone. It was a place of solitude, wrapped in the hush of pine needles and echoing ravens. She had painted there once, but never brought anyone, not even Jonah. Whisper wasn't there when Rhea arrived. She set the crate down near the base of a bent spruce and sat beside it, her knees folded, her hands wrapped around the edges of the lid. Ash stirred, let out a tiny yawn, then whined softly. "I know," she whispered. "I know it's not fair." She opened the crate. Ash poked his head out cautiously, nose twitching at the tapestry of scents braided through the air. Sap, snowmelt, the distant musk of deer. He stepped out unsteadily, legs, stiff tail tucked, and began to sniff the perimeter. Then he turned toward Rhea. His eyes found hers, and for a moment she thought he might retreat, might nestle back into the folds of wool and demand 1 more day. Instead, he walked forward and rubbed his side gently against her shin. Rhea didn't move. She couldn't. That simple gesture, quiet, instinctive, affectionate, pressed into her like a second heartbeat. A rustle behind the tree line. From the shadows stepped Whisper, her fur catching flecks of sunlight like molten silver. Her gait was calm, but purposeful. There was no hesitation in her posture, only a quiet command. She was ready. Ash saw her. His ears perked, and in a blink, he was bounding toward her, stumbling twice before collapsing against her chest. Whisper lowered her head, nuzzling the top of his neck, her breath warm in the cold air. Then she looked up at Rhea, not long, not dramatically, just enough. A pause, a flicker of eye contact that said more than language ever could. Then, with her pup tucked close to her side, she turned and vanished into the trees. Ash followed, glancing back only once. Then they were gone, swallowed by the woods. Rhea remained in the clearing, the crate beside her, like an empty cocoon. The forest was silent save for the trickle of meltwater and the call of a raven overhead. She pressed her palm to the snow where Ash had stood. The warmth was fading fast. She didn't cry, not right away. She sat in stillness, the cold seeping up through her jeans until her knees ached and her fingers turned numb. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for, maybe a sound, maybe a sign. But none came. On the way back to the cabin, she passed the old spruce that leaned like a crooked finger toward the river bend. At its roots, scattered in the snow, lay 3 silver wolf hairs, luminous against the white like threads of moonlight. She knelt and picked them up, cradling them in her mitten like feathers. She said nothing, only smiled. That evening, the cabin was quieter than she remembered it ever being. The fire burned as it always had, but the warmth didn't reach as far. The room felt too wide, too hollow. She tidied the blankets near the stove, but left one slightly folded just in case. She didn't put away the crate. Not yet. That night, Rhea sat at her desk and opened her sketchbook. Her fingers trembled as she began to draw, not Ash, not Whisper, but the space they had left behind. The hollow in the snow, the lean of the trees, the small marks of paws retreating into the unknown. Her strokes were slow, reverent. She titled the piece, "The Goodbye That Stayed." Jonah called that night, his voice warm even through the line. "How'd it go?" he asked. "They're gone," she said. A pause. "You okay?" "I think so. It hurts, but it feels right. You did what no one else could have." Rhea glanced toward the window where frost crept along the edge of the pane like veins in glass. She thought of Whisper, of the way she bowed her head that final time. Maybe Rhea said, "But they did something for me too." That night, the wind didn't howl. It moved through the trees with softness, as if even the forest itself understood the silence that had been left behind. By the time spring reached Juneau, it did so gently, like a breath on glass. The snow melted in layers slow and reluctant, revealing earth that had waited months to feel the sun. Pine needles shimmered with morning dew, and thin streams reawakened between moss-covered stones. But at the edge of the forest near Mendenhall Valley, one cabin stood unchanged in its solitude, warmed not just by wood fire, but by memory. Rhea Calloway had returned to her routines. She spent her mornings checking the caribou tracks down by the lower basin, and her afternoons hiking to reset wildlife cameras. It was work she knew well, but it felt different now, less like observation, more like participation. Some days she carried venison scraps wrapped in cloth and laid them at the base of a crooked spruce, the same tree Ash had once walked past on his way into the wild. She never lingered. She never looked back. Jonah still checked in every few weeks. Sometimes he brought supplies, sometimes just conversation. He never asked too many questions. He had the wisdom to know that some experiences don't want to be examined. They just want to breathe. One morning in early November, long after the summer faded into golden memory, Rhea woke to the first real snow of the season. It coated her porch in silence, dusted the roof like powdered sugar. She stepped outside with a steaming mug and immediately stopped. There, arranged with careful intention at the edge of the steps, was a small circle. Inside it sat 3 things: a bundle of silver wolf hair still soft and clean, a smooth black river stone that she knew had not come from anywhere near her stream, and a fan of birch, leaves their pale skins curled inward like hands cupping a secret. It was too precise to be chance. She knelt down, heart fluttering, and touched each object with the reverence of someone handling sacred relics. The air held no sound but the soft hum of wind across the treetops. She closed her eyes. Whisper. Ash. They had been here. For the next few days, Rhea couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made her feel less alone. At night, she sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, speaking softly to the trees. She told stories of her day of the wolf tracks she'd found by the riverbank of a new sketch she was working on. Sometimes she just sat in silence, letting the stillness hold her, and then one morning she hiked to check her camera trap by the stream ridge. The device, a small rectangular lens tucked into the crook of a cedar, had been blinking with data. She removed the memory card and brought it back to the cabin. What she found made her breath stop. The photo was taken just 3 nights before. In it, 2 wolves stood in the snow beneath a full moon. One was tall, confident, her eyes unmistakably calm and fierce. Whisper. Beside her, slightly smaller, but no longer a pup, was a young wolf, with a hint of mischief in his posture and fur that shimmered with a darker sheen. Ash. They were looking straight into the lens, not startled, not evasive, as if they knew. Rhea stared at the image until her tea went cold. She printed it and pinned it beside her desk, just below her largest canvas, a painting she had nearly finished. The scene depicted the forest clearing where Ash had said goodbye. Snow falling, shadows dancing between trees, the sky breaking open with light. She called it Farewell in the Snow and had never meant to share it, but now something told her it was time. In January, she submitted it along with 10 other paintings to the Glacier Coast Gallery, a modest space in downtown Juneau that had always felt a little out of reach. The gallery owner, Marla Jennings, was a woman in her 50s with platinum gray curls and a reputation for having a 6th sense for meaningful work. She wore a different pair of patterned glasses every day and judged art by emotion, not pedigree. When Marla first viewed Rhea's collection, she said nothing for a long while. Then, stepping back from Farewell in the Snow, she touched her hand lightly to her heart and whispered, "There's something sacred here." The exhibit opened in late February. It was a quiet affair, but word spread. People lingered by Rhea's paintings, drawn in, not just by technique, but by the vulnerability stitched between each brushstroke. Her depictions of Whisper's watchful eyes, Ash's small form curled near a fire, and the haunting silence of the forest struck something primal in visitors. It wasn't just about wolves. It was about letting go. About what remains after love has moved on. Rhea kept one piece for herself. A simple painting framed in dark wood showing the silver circle of objects left on her porch. She titled it Winter's Gift and hung it above her desk beside the real relics themselves. She had sealed the wolf hairs, the stone, and the birch leaves in a glass case, not to preserve them, but to honor them. That spring, a letter came from the conservation office. It included a summary of confirmed wolf pack sightings in the region trail cam data and a short, handwritten note from Sarah Cole, the new wildlife director. Pack appears healthy. 2 alphas confirmed. Juvenile male active and strong. Seems you did more than save a life, you gave it back to the wild. On the last page was a small photo clipped to the corner. Whisper atop a snowy ridge, her eyes sharp. Ash beside her mid-stride. That night, as twilight pressed softly over the woods, Rhea sat on her porch again. The world was hushed, but not empty. She spoke quietly, more breath than words. "You showed me that love doesn't cling. It waits, it watches, and when it's time, it lets go." The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a howl rose through the trees, low, familiar, and impossibly close. Rhea smiled, resting her hand gently on the wooden railing. "I heard you. Sometimes the most powerful love is the kind that lets go." This story reminds us that healing does not always mean holding on. It can mean trusting, waiting, and giving others the space to return to who they were meant to be. In our own lives, we may face moments where we must release control. Let a relationship breathe, or simply believe in something beyond words. Like Rhea and the wolves, we find strength not just in connection, but in knowing when to set it free. If this story touched something in your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us what letting go means to you. And if you'd like more stories like this, remember to subscribe to the channel.